And we're going to explain that to you right now. This is about much more than activism. Tomorrow, the corporate trans agenda will turn on the very ones for whom today it advocates. And that's because at the highest levels, the trans agenda is not about securing rights for these young people. As I said earlier, it is a fundamental reorientation of morality, sexuality, and ultimately humanity. Our youngest children are being transformed unwittingly through a process of exposure to inappropriate, graphic, sexualized content, which naturally evokes a sense of shock and shame that traumatizes the young mind. And so, in a state of trauma, the mind is highly suggestible. So that traumatic state provides the context for specific programming. This is how trauma bonding works. It's how satanic ritual abuse works. It's how mind control works, especially the MK Ultra brand of mind control that we're all so familiar with today. So whether this was shown to be done intentionally or not, we don't even have to go that far yet. The outcome is the same. Corporations are grooming young people today to cause them to identify as transgender in greater numbers than ever before. And that is not because the culture is more accepting. It's not because there are more transgender people than there's ever been before, or they're just able to live it out in the public now because we're so accepting of it now. No, it's because young people are being programmed into this. So we're going to be, over the course of our coverage on this new angle on this whole thing, we're going to be breaking this down for you so that it's all very clear. And so that you'll have information, facts, and the tools to discuss this with people that you come into contact with as well, because this has to be shut down as fast as possible. And it starts out with the language. Transgender it's not a type of person. Jennifer Bilek is one of the people that we're going to be introducing to you. She's a secular feminist and environmental activist. But she's called this thing out. Now, some of her conclusions we might not agree with completely, but where she has followed the money, you can decide for yourself. Very compelling. And it starts with this word transgender. It doesn't mean anything. The word means nothing. It's like non-discrimination, anti-racism. These words don't really mean anything. It's a conglomerate name for an array of corporate pressures which groom children and adults for industrial body disassociation. So those opening, so these people who are running this, who are putting this forward, they're opening humanity to further corporate encroachments into our bodies. It is the colonization of humans, directly targeting the next generation. It is, as renowned transhumanist Martin Rothblatt, let me get his picture up here for you. Yeah, I'm going to say his picture.
He wants to be a she.
Sorry, there you go.
He wants to be a she.
He pretends to be. Dude looks like a lady. There's Martin Rothblatt, right? As Martin Rothblatt says, this is the on-ramp to transhumanism. There's the underlying story. There's the big story here, right? Martin Rothblatt, this guy is he's the one who has given us satellite radio and satellite TV. Billionaire.
Yeah, so the gender industry is corporate grooming for transhumanism.
Now, we're going to break that down for you in great detail. We won't get to all that detail tonight, but we want to introduce this topic to you. Rothblatt here, as you can see, he has his own transhumanism religion. Says we're making God as we're implementing technology that is ever more all-knowing, ever-present, all-powerful, and beneficent. Now that last word, beneficent. Really? I don't think they're ready to say that.
The audacity, the rebellion.
Yes.
That's just rebellious.
Now, what's interesting about this is the word transgender doesn't define anything clearly. This is Jennifer Bilek. This is her opinion, and I happen to agree with someone. I think that this is excellent work that you need to be aware of. So the word doesn't really define anything clearly. In fact, the word transgenderism obscures the truth of an industry that is manifested in its name. It allows definitional goalposts to keep being. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's like an umbrella of things under trans. Just think of it as a corporate entity.
Folks, they have flags. It's not just the rainbow flag. There's a flag for transgender. There's a flag for intersex. There's a flag for whatever else.
All of them.
Yeah. Look, let's just take a look at them for a second.
Yeah, we've looked at those before.
Oh, I got to play these tweets. That's right. I forgot about these tweets. Check out this video, folks. I'm a little bit excited about this because this story is so huge.
Well, it connects all the dots.
It does.
Yeah.
This is going to put the whole story for the New World Order is going to have, you're going to have something to really hold on to with this story. All right. So I'm a little bit giddy and overwhelmed by it because I want to dive into all of it now, but we can't. It's too big.
Pray for this video.
Pray for this video.
Yeah.
No question. And that this story can come out. Now, we're not the only ones reporting this, just so you know. But this type of information is certainly being suppressed in a big way. So let's start out this way. Listen to how these folks are speaking, what they're actually saying here. Their emotions. I can't hear that, can you?
You are, no matter how hard they try. You are a gift to this world.
Tonight, from his home in Florida. As far as we can tell, and what we were prepared for here is that this is basically a campaign speech. In which he is
I've got
repeating
Rachel
the same
barking in my ear over here
against his perceived enemies. It is just getting started. So far, he's just giving his normal list of grievances.
Look at Rachel getting even with us. Look at Matt Al. Matt Al's getting even with us. Hillary. It's the spirit of Hillary. She stepped in to shut that one down. Okay, hang on just a minute here. We've got, now let me get back to that. Just pay attention to how effusive the love is here. And then we want to challenge you to think about this a certain way.
Dear trans kids,
my dazzling trans youngsters,
my young trans powerhouses,
my courageous trans bunnies,
beautiful, extraordinary trans kids. Hi, we love you. That wasn't part of the script, but I added it.
You're extraordinary.
You're inspiring.
You're exactly who you're supposed to be.
Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
No one can erase who you are, no matter how hard they try. You are a gift to this world.
You.
Okay, well, they're wonderful people, right? Here's what's weird. Again, I can't remember the name of the disorder, but there is a disorder out there where people, where you have an arm or a leg, one of your limbs, and it's a brain disorder where you don't feel like this arm really belongs to you for some reason. It's a dissociative disorder. It's disassociation from a body part. It's a sad element. It's a sad disorder that people struggle with. Where are their parades? Where are the YouTube videos for those people? Where's Teen Vogue when it comes to that? Right? If this is really a disorder where people are struggling with disassociating not just from a limb, not just from an experience, but from their body. Why are we telling them that? Why are we celebrating them this way? as though we need to lean into our disorders. What? So it's this word transgenderism. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's a deconstruction. What this movement does is instituting gender identity as a legal concept, and it's a deconstruction of what it means to be human. Because we are, by God's design, a dimorphic species. That means there are males and females, and then that's all there are. You can't be something else. You can have all the surgery you want. You can take all the chemicals that you want, but you cannot change that. Not yet, anyway. What is happening is that the corporate state is deconstructing sex as a step toward alienating us from humanity, from our bodies, and ultimately from humanity. So, endless discussions about gender identity, right? And our wonderful transgender kids. This obscures the facts. The word transgenderism obscures the facts about what is going on right here. The mission of the whole movement, as we said earlier, has shifted from like equality in marriage. Now you'll hear people say it. We just want to be accepted as human. Well, amen. We want you to know that you're human too. But it's got nothing to do with this. Who was it that gave you the idea, that put into your head that you're not human, or that people aren't seeing you as human? What is that argument all about? So it's just a vague concept. It's being embedded into the legal structures in the guise of human rights. Here's where it gets dangerous. When this becomes human right, where someone can disassociate from their body, from their objective sex, when that becomes a human right, then it becomes possible to arrest anyone who diverges or dissents. It becomes possible to remove children from parents who try to tell their children, no, hang on, everything's going to be okay. You're going to go through puberty and everything's going to be all right. Everyone's confused at this age. That's not allowed anymore. It's referred to as a human rights movement for people who disown their God-given sex. And a new reality will take over where good is identified as evil and evil is identified as good. And that is the New World Order. That is the ideology. That will be even the spiritual element of the New World Order, right? Because it's to transcend the body. It's time to wake up. Like never before in our lifetimes has more been at stake than is right now. Remember 2 Peter chapter 2. Many will follow their sensuality. Because of them, the way of the truth will be blasphemed. In their greed, they will exploit you with false words. All right. One of the terms is autogynephilia. Auto, self, gyna, female, philia, love. Right. That is where a man idolizes or is attracted to himself in the form of a woman. Okay? This is eugenics. Right? It is, transhumanism is eugenics. It's eugenics in the sense of those who don't want to dissociate from their bodies are not fit. Now, what you'll find out right now as we go into this story, the first person here that we're going to cover will be Tim Gill, is that the men who are behind this, some jump in if you have a point here, because Summer's done, she's the one who found this information. So she's put in more time at this so far than I have. But these are men. These are wealthy billionaires who are funding and causing this kind of movement that you see there on the screen right now so that they can live out their fetish.
Yeah, they want to normalize their fetish in the culture.
And the way that they're making it happen is through their billions, through non-governmental organizations. In fact, it's very interesting when you find out that a lot of the foundations that from in the 80s and 90s and 2000s were about raising funds for HIV research and treatment. Within the last 10 years have all shifted now to trans issues.
Yeah, they're operating through the same NGOs that were operating when AIDS and HIV was rampant.
Well, this thing is this. You just have to be grateful, the grace of God that women. This is for all we found so far are really brave women. A lot of them who are not in the faith at all are the ones.
Well, it's coming from the feminist voice, so it does actually make sense, like the real feminists.
Yeah, the original, the traditional, classical feminism.
Right, so they've been able to identify that, hey, wait a minute, like I guess about 10 years ago, people started to be deplatformed when they were talking about, there's only a male and there's only a female. And so that's what led Jennifer Bilek to start investigating, hey, what's going on here? And then she found out that the medical industrial complex is actually bigger than the military industrial complex, and that what stands...
Wow.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that particular fact.
Yes, that's right. Wow. And so this thing, it's serving so many functions as just a gigantic moneymaker. If you can basically, they're attempting to normalize the idea that human reproductive sex exists on a spectrum, and ultimately they want to control reproduction. Where have we heard that before? Control reproduction.
And now I think the ultimate goal, right, is to get reproduction in the hands of the tech industry.
Right.
Google, right? We want Google. We want Facebook.
Yeah,
it's not Google and Facebook, but it's some tech giant behemoth. Right? We want reproduction to be guided by the tech industry. What was that? Do you have the notes on the Georgia Guidestones?
Well, it's
guide reproduction.
Guide reproduction wisely.
The second.
That's the second one, and then the next one is create a new living language. The third one is create a new living language. The first one is keep humanity under 500 million. So. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this has population control written all over it, totally. It does.
Let me tell you this. Here's one of the main reasons that we would say that. Okay. This is where the contradictions just become so rich, where you can see that obviously you've got to tell people who are swayed or persuaded by this that they're being taken for a ride. Listen to this. This used to be transgenderism used to be something that was something that happened to it was very, very rare. And when it did happen, it was almost always a young boy who felt like he was in the wrong body, or felt like he should be a girl. But for some reason, now it's like, well, it's not all, but a lot of it is teenage girls. Now, here's what's happening. Even without parental consent, some cases, even without parents being aware that it's happened, a teenage girl can say that she feels like she's really a boy. And in some cases, it's happened where Abigail Shrier polled some of her friends and had them go, ask their teenage daughters, and like in one class, like a seventh or eighth grade class, 30% of the girls in the class said they identified as trans somehow. That's a social contagion. That's not really happening. No, I mean, the kids are really experiencing something, but it's because it's happening. They're being programmed. They're being traumatized, by being shown these graphic images.
Yeah.
It produces shame. When you're young, I remember this as a kid myself, the first time I saw Boy George.
You've talked about that.
Felt weird. I just felt weird. And there was some kind of shame. And in some way, there was some level of trauma at seeing this image that to my eye.
But that's just a guy with makeup. Like what they're watching is straight up pornographic.
That's how much things have changed, right?
And even in schools and sexual education, they're looking at really graphic pictures, and we've talked about that before on this channel.
That's how you do mind control, right? You traumatize the person. While they're traumatized, you can input whatever you want to be in there. Another personality, perhaps.
Yeah, because people, the kids, they just get shocked, and then they feel like a sense of shame, and then they feel a sense of confusion, but probably they also have some sort of arousal, and then they start to dissociate.
I didn't feel any arousal when I saw Boy George.
Well, but I'm talking about the sex ed.
But I was shocked.
The social media. Yeah.
I was shocked, and I was traumatized in some way, And so I can see how that would be.
But they're doing this on purpose.
And now where in my day when I was a little boy like that, it was just obvious. It was you didn't want to be gay. You didn't want people to think you were. But today, let's say you're a young child and you've been exposed to these graphic images and these ideas, right? And by nature, shame. There's some shame associated with just seeing it. The trauma comes. And then there's these ideas that are swirling around you, confused. And then the next thing that happens through social media and general culture, all you're hearing out there is this. You start hearing nothing but this kind of language right here.
Dear trans kids,
right, this is all you
dazzling trans youngsters.
Positive reinforcement.
Right. And so let's say
reinforcement, yeah.
Let's say especially maybe you're a teenage girl and you just feel awkward and you're not popular and you feel weird, and well, you're very likely to hear this and be, well, of course I'm trans. Right, well, I'm trans.
Yeah, the whole culture is mirroring it back to you, right? Like in the school system, exactly. on the television, in the social media, everywhere you turn, billboards, everything. So it's constantly reinforcing this.
Now, here's the point I wanted to get to a moment ago. Here's what happens, right? This is a movement about equality. It's feminism, right? It's about, it's anti-racism. Okay, so let's say this teenage girl is influenced like this and she feels like she's trans, and immediately, very easily, puberty blockers will be made available, prescribed, and then but the main puberty blocker, the primary one that's given out, is a drug called Lupron. You know what Lupron is? Lupron has always been a drug. This is why it was created in the first place, as it's synthesized in the first place. It was the drug that was given to sex offenders, males, to chemically castrate sex offenders, right? So
it's outrageous.
Okay, so what happens is this teenage girl says she's confused, and the school immediately intervenes, and she's given puberty blockers. We're going to just hit the pause button for a little while. What happens next, as Abigail Shrier reports, almost always the next step is, right, she's already feeling out of step with her peers. Almost always the next step is they've identified as trans, so they need to go ahead and start the transition to the opposite sex. So what almost always happens is they're given testosterone.
Which causes aggression.
And even worse, it always causes
sterilization.
Infertility.
Yeah.
When you give puberty blockers, and then for a female, and then it's followed up with testosterone, in almost every case, it causes infertility almost right away.
They're sterilizing the population.
So guide reproduction wisely, they
Guide
said.
reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. That's the actual line.
But now, where do they get the testosterone, folks? Yeah, the pharmaceutical company. But Who gives out more testosterone to teenage girls who say they're trans than anyone? Guess who? It's Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, which is the most racist organization that's ever existed. You know, at least in the modern age, a eugenicist organization started by Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist, who was an obvious, bold, unapologetic racist. She wanted to remove unfit people from the planet. And by unfit, she meant people of color. So the Black Lives Matter movement. Judgment. Right, the Black Lives Matter movement, right?
That was her racist judgment, yes.
Which was all about. It really became about the trans movement. Who's supporting them? Who's helping them to transition? It is the most racist, or it is the organization that wants to destroy them. Now that's the contradictions that we see at work here. This is why you have to let people know that you're
manipulated.
You're being hoodwinked.
Yeah.
Listen to it. But it's worse than that because it's embedded in the culture. It's a mindset. Now listen to Sean Carroll, who's an astrophysicist. I believe he's a very well-known scientist. Who, you know, you see him all over YouTube. He's on Science Channel a lot. He said categories such as male and female are just human inventions. They're stories we tell ourselves because it helps us to make sense of our world. He said the basic stuff of reality is quantum wave function, or a collection of particles and forces. Whatever the fundamental stuff turns out to be, that's all just overlay. So you see, this is not just coming from fringe social media influencers. It's in the institution. It's taught to kids in school. Right? Yuval Harari, who Summer did an excellent job of exposing a few weeks or months, a couple months ago, about his book. What was that book called? Something Us.
Oh my gosh. Unstoppable Us.
Unstoppable Us.
Yes.
What he's doing is he's teaching children a new myth about who we are. A new religion. Right? Harari says all kinds of fascinating, interesting things like this in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He says people's identities are a crucial historic force. Human power depends on mass cooperation, and mass cooperation depends on manufacturing mass identities. All mass identities are based on fictional stories, not on scientific facts or even on economic necessities. This is a guy who wants, he wants his ideology to rule the world.
Yeah, his children's book was supposed to be the actual story of the history of the planet and humans and all this stuff.
And school systems are taking it up and using it as part of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. Stuff like this. He says attempts by Nazis and communists to scientifically determine human identities based on race and class proved to be dangerous pseudoscience. And since the scientists have been extremely reluctant to help define any natural identities for human beings. What? Really? This is a brilliant man, right? So how do we make people feel loyal to one human tribe and hostile to another? He goes on to talk about how religion is the problem. Whether beautiful or ugly, all such religious traditions unite certain people while distinguishing them from their neighbors. Freud ridiculed the obsession people have about such matters as the narcissism of small differences. Now, to a degree, this is correct. You see this happening right now with the Trump deal, right? With what's happening. The reason that there won't be any sort of uprising against the people who are trying to take down our nation is because we're over here, we're all too busy arguing about little things. Freud was right about that part of it. But it goes on to say, if you happen to be gay or lesbian, it is literally a matter of life and death, whether you live in a place like Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia. In Israel, LGBT people enjoy the protection of the law, and there are even some rabbis who would bless marriage of two women. In Iran, gays, lesbians are systematically persecuted and occasionally even executed. So if you blame Facebook, Trump, or Putin for ushering in a new and frightening era of post-truth, remind yourself that centuries ago, millions of Christians locked themselves inside a self-reinforcing mythological bubble, never daring to question the factual veracity of the Bible, while millions of Muslims, as he says here, did the same thing. And so for millennia...
Dangerous stuff.
Yeah, for millennia, much of what passed for news and he's talking about fake news here. Much of what passed for news and facts in human social networks were stories about miracles, angels, demons, and witches, with bold reporters giving live coverage straight from the deepest pits of the underworld. We have zero scientific evidence, he says, that Eve was tempted by the serpent, that the souls of all infidels burn in hell after they die, or that the creator of the universe doesn't like it when a Brahmin marries a Dalit. When a Brahmin marries a Dalit. Yet, billions of people have believed in these stories for thousands of years because some fake news lasts forever. What is Harari's answer to this? What is the World Economic Forum's answer to this? Well, clearly, it's to create a new myth, a better myth. Right. He just said that all that does is cause animosity. But we've got a better idea. Our myth is going to be better, he says.
Once again, we've said it before, it's a technological religious cult. That's what this is.
Right on. Well
and
said.
If you
that's
don't agree with it, then you're going to be canceled.
This is from the White House here. Right. This is right out of the White House. So you can see what's happening here, folks. This word, transgender, this word here, doesn't mean anything. That is an obfuscation for a movement that fully intends to reorient humanity in a transhuman direction. In fact, in an anti-human direction. Let's listen to Calvin Robinson here for just a minute, what he had to say.
There used to be a time when terrorists would be proscribed and condemned. But in the politically correct 21st century West, it seems we're always on the back foot. It used to be said, never negotiate with terrorists. These days, it feels like we give in before demands are even made. Take a look at what happened with Kelly J. Keane on her recent trip to New Zealand. The LGBTQ+ community protested before she even arrived, claiming they would be unsafe if she was allowed to speak. Trans activists said they feared for their safety because Kelly J is such a danger to their existence. Kelly J, being the brave women's rights protester that she is, went anyway. What happened? She was attacked. Not only was she abused verbally, but liquids were thrown at her too. She was almost trampled by an aggressive mob. She genuinely feared for her life. Were trans activists in danger from one little woman travelling to say her piece? Or were they playing the victim, gaslighting us all, being cry bullies in order to shut down opposing viewpoints whilst hoping to cause her harm? I would argue it's a totalitarian tactic often used by people who call themselves anti-fascists. They've learned from the fascists they purport to detest by using their methodologies against the rest of us. And then there was the absolutely awful shooting in Nashville. A trans activist shot and killed children and staff at a Christian school. I won't name her because she does not deserve fame, but her actions were evil and immediately followed calls for a trans day of vengeance. Trans activists use hyperbolic language like trans genocide, as if denying their identity is the same as killing them. In the liberal progressive West, most people would be happy for anyone to live their lives however they see fit, as long as they're not harming anyone. The problem trans activists face is when they try to impose their ideology onto everyone else.
There it is.
I would say denying delusion and refusing to affirm fantasy is not the same as genocide, and to claim otherwise is quite disgusting.
What he said there, that's the crux of the matter. Right? They're telling you, they're telling us that you're harming us. There's a genocide happening to us. But it's not coming from us.
Yeah, exactly. It's coming from the people that are doing it to them. The people that claim to be supporting them.
It's coming from those people who claim to be supporting them. That's exactly right. It's coming from these people who are putting the rhetoric in their head. They can't hear us. That's what's sad and frustrating.
Yeah, this Kelly J. Keene, she's what she's done is she's identified.
How do you spell that?
Kelliejay Keene.
Do we have it in
Minchell.
our bookmarks yet?
I don't.
I'll bet I can find it in 2 seconds. Kelly J.
Yeah, Kelly J. Keene. Basically, she's just pointing out that the trans movement is exactly what we're telling you right now. That if you follow.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. There she is, right there. She wants to stand up for actual women and women's rights.
So what was she doing here?
She wanted to let women have a platform to speak about their issues, what was on their heart.
She was there to talk. She was there to speak, right?
She was there to speak. And she also has identified the fact that this trans movement is like a farce.
Who's attacking whom, right? Who is attacking who, right? This is, look, 2 Peter 2, they're going to try to confuse you with language. Right? They're going to tell lies and tell you that it's the truth. They're going to try to do their best to convince you that you're attacking them. That is ultimately gaslighting.
Yeah, once again, gaslighting.
Listen to this gaslighting right here. Let me back it up.
And one of the things that we saw during the midterm elections is that people don't want their freedoms to be taken. They want us to fight for their freedoms. And so it is shameful, it is disturbing, and our hearts go out to the trans community as they are under attack right now. And one of the things that we saw during the midterm elections is that people don't want their freedoms to be taken. They want us to fight for their freedoms. And so it is shameful, it is disturbing, and our hearts go out to the trans community as they are under attack right now. And our hearts go out to the trans community as they are under attack right now.
This is Stockholm Syndrome.
Folks, that right there. Let me get you a definition of gaslighting real quick. Just so you know what we're talking about here. This is...
People love their abuser. They think that these people are... They think that the powers that be and all this legislation and everything is going to give them a happy life.
Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser attempts to sow self-doubt and confusion in their victim's mind. Typically, gaslighters are seeking to gain power and control over the other person by distorting reality. Forcing them to question their own judgment and intuition, by distorting reality. Don't forget here what it says here in 2 Peter 2 as Apostle Peter here is warning people of something very similar to this. Verse 3, and in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. They will lie to you in their greed, in their desire for whatever their goal is, which is something satanic and anti-human. They will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago. The judgment's coming. That's the truth is. And we shouldn't celebrate that they're heading to judgment. We should, that's what we're here to do, is to share the gospel with people like this. But it's coming, and that's what we're dealing with right now, folks. Okay, so we're going to run. I think we might have to call it off here, and pick up with this tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to put a couple of articles under the video.
Let me do Tim Gill.
Really, really, really good.
Let me run through this Tim Gill piece right quick, since I promised that, because that's our story. We're going to punish the wicked, the guy says. Right. And what we want to do is in our next show, I had planned to do it tonight, but we're just trying to introduce you to this. We want to show you how the movement is just bunk from the start. When they say there's a genocide on them, there's no evidence for that. There's gender affirming therapy is all, it's all a front. For instance, like in 100 years of diagnostic history, right? Gender dysphoria typically began in early childhood between the ages of 2 and 4. Usually it was a boy. Historically, that's been the classic presentation of gender dysphoria. And over 70% of them, hey, by the way, this is the science. This is the science. Over 70% of them naturally outgrew that gender dysphoria. You know how? By going through puberty. Well, they did not.
Imagine that.
But those who didn't grow out of it, those 30% of that very tiny number of people that this happened to, experienced gender dysphoria, those who didn't grow out of it never believed that they were women. They just actually felt more comfortable presenting themselves as women. Right? Today, when children have these confusions, which we can show you without a doubt and will, how it's being programmed into them. Today, when they show up confused, we just label them trans kids. Teachers, therapists, doctors, affirmative care, they're there to affirm this confusion. They're there to capitalize on the confusion of gender dysphoria and to immediately help the young girl or the young boy to immediately transition as fast as possible. And then come the puberty blockers, and then for the girls it'll be testosterone, and then from that point on, infertile. And so we think this is appalling. But what is Tim Gill up to? Well, he wants to punish us. He wants to punish us for not living by lies. So this is an article, very quickly here. This is an article from Rolling Stone magazine. And it starts out like this. They're on Park Avenue in New York at a fundraiser. Joe Biden slams his fist on the table and says, "Now's not the time to go sit on the sidelines." That's something I say here to you. But then he says, we need to push hard. So this is back in May of 2016. 30 of the nation's most prolific LGBTQ donors were gathered in one room, in one penthouse on Park Avenue in Manhattan, scene of the crime. Biden thanks the men and women in the audience for their efforts so far, but there is one person he singles out by name, an unassuming and slightly awkward man seated in the last row of chairs. It's this guy. It is this guy. Biden says he's incredible. If not for the work of Tim Gill, there is no telling how far behind we would be on this LGBTQ rights movement. So this guy, Gill, I don't know if I said this already or not, but he's a software programmer and tycoon, made his money in the 90s. He's not a household name. Nobody's really heard of him. And we can just assume, we can speculate that that's by design because it works out better for them if it's by design. But in the past 30 years, he's given $500 million to this campaign. But what does he do? What is he actually doing? Well, as we said, they've shifted their focus from equality, like marriage equality, to this much broader focus of non-discrimination. So in the same way that anti-racism is not really about racism, as the name would suggest. Rather, it's the creation of a protected class. It's a mechanism for identifying and destroying another person, another class of people, or an organization, or a company, or anyone that dissents or challenges their dogma. Non-discrimination is also a banner that you can rally a group under. It's a rod with which to bludgeon all dissenters. So it's not about rights. It's not about equality. It's about the total reorientation by force, if they see necessary, of values, morality, gender, and sexuality. And gender and sexuality, those two in particular, are being fetishized. They're the idol of the moment. And we say of the moment because that is not the ultimate goal. Trans rights are not the goal. The goal is much broader. And once you see this full picture, you'll understand what's really at stake here. It's not in any way good for any of the people, especially these young children, these teenagers who are primarily targeted. Our youngest, our most vulnerable. If we sit back and just watch it, we're derelict. It's sinful to sit back and watch and watch our youngest and most vulnerable be used and taken advantage of this way. It's the deconstruction of humanity. The transformation of humanity is underway. To get there, this is the biggest and probably the most revolting point. Just like the vaccine rollout and agenda, what we see here is, man, I really have to be careful here. What we see here is a mass experimentation being done on young people in the West. Everyone really, but specifically on those who use social media regularly, those who are in the institutions like public schools and universities specifically. There's a mass experimentation on all of these people. That's a major element of this movement. What is that experimentation for? It's to find out how we can do better surgery. How can we find better drugs? Because ultimately, disassociation from the body, getting out of the body, transhumanism, ultimately, they're using people as cattle, as lab rats.
I was going to say, can we look up the 60 Minutes piece from Australia?
Absolutely. We're going to do, yeah. Let me cover Gill and we'll play that at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Because that shows you exactly how this works. So I'll get through Gill here fast. He's got the Gill Foundation, started in 1994. It underwrites academic research, polling, litigation, data analytics, and field organizing, right? He's got something called Gill Action, which is a political group. Another thing called Outgiving, which is his donor club. You have to be invited to it, so it's the richest of the richest. And so they decide where they're going to put their money. So his fingerprints are on nearly every major victory in the so-called March to Marriage.
He's like the Bill Gates of the trans movement.
Yeah, and he is really under the radar, and that's why we got to, expose this thing. Ephesians 5:11, this is really, that's what this is. So when you talk about things like public health, he's there, right? He's in the middle of this. The Supreme Court, Obergefell versus Hodges case that was recently overturned. That was one of his triumphs. The attorney who argued that case said, without a doubt, we would not be where we are without Tim Gill and the Gill Foundation. Now, here's what I wanted to bring to you. In 2017, he had something called his Southern Strategy, where specifically had his eyes on Georgia and North Carolina. So he influenced Georgia. He got that done in Georgia, right? Let's see here. I think it was Governor... Right here. In January 2016, Georgia Prospers kicked off with more than 100 businesses signed on, including Coca-Cola, Google, and Marriott. As the RFRA, that would be Religious Freedom Reform Acts, fight played out in Atlanta, his assistant's phone never stopped ringing, he says, with companies clamoring to sign his group's pro-equality pledge. But the full genius of the approach wasn't clear to him until another dad at his daughter's basketball practice mentioned reading about the effort in a company-wide email. And that man worked for Delta, which was not at the time was not a pro-LGBTQ anything at that moment, which had joined Georgia Prospers. Delta had joined this movement, Georgia Prospers, and was mobilizing its employees to call their representatives, lawmakers. So folks, when was the last time you heard of any sort of organic movement, where you got Delta involved, right?
Yeah, this is top down.
Exactly. Thank you.
Top down.
This is
not grassroots.
This is why Summer's on the show, because that's the point, right? I've just talked around that the whole time. That's what you got to know. This is coming from the top, not from the bottom.
And you guys will understand that fully as we go into this, because there's a lot of layers.
So what Georgia was doing was they were conservative lawmakers there were trying to push through religious freedom restoration, a bill in March of 2016. Governor Deal who Rolling Stone reports is a deeply religious Republican in his own right, vetoed it, of course, right? Because he's a deeply religious Republican. Well, he says, Governor Gill said, I do not think we have to discriminate against anyone to protect the faith-based community in Georgia, except the religious. It's okay to discriminate against them, right? Why would Governor Gill do that if he's a deeply religious Republican? Because that's where the money is. He wants to keep his position. He wants to stay where he is. And this is what politicians do today. It's a corporatocracy, right? You think that you elect people, probably most of you don't think that here, but most people think that they elect people who go there to represent them. Let's assume that we do elect the people and it's all fair and square. When they get there, 9 times out of 10, they're going to do the bidding of whoever threatens them or pays them. Okay, so Governor Gill vetoed this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This was part of Gill's Southern strategy, so it worked there. But also present at this Manhattan powwow here, this fundraising event in Manhattan, was Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper, who at the time was the Attorney General. He was the Attorney General. He certainly wasn't the Eternal General, but he was the Attorney General of North Carolina. Represent? That's where we are. Okay, but he was at this meeting. Cooper flew into New York for the Gill event. And at the time, the big deal here was something called the HB2 law. There was it was the restriction on bathroom access for transgender people that led to the cancellation of dozens of events. Almost $4 billion of revenue was lost, specifically around the Charlotte area, because they didn't find it necessary to be building a third bathroom all over the place. Bruce Springsteen, Ringo Starr canceled tour dates in North Carolina. The NBA moved the All-Star game out of town. The NCAA tournament relocated all 7 of its championship events. And Roy Cooper's bid to unseat the then Republican Governor Pat McCrory, who had signed the HB2 bill into law, Gill said this is a must win. So at the time this article was written, it wasn't known. But of course, it worked out. We've been under the Roy Cooper regime here for 2 terms, I believe, at least. So this is what he means when he says we're going in to the most difficult states and we're going to punish the wicked. That's what he means, right? He's going to say that we're fighting for equality, for people who just want to be recognized as human and take part in society. No one's stopping these people from being human or taking part in society at all. But that's what's programmed into the head.
That's what they're being told over and over and over and over again.
So it's a declaration of war. Here's just to get off of Gill here. There's another thing I found interesting when Rolling Stone went to Denver, which is where he's located, to find out. Let me give you the full context of this comment here right quick before we get out of it. This comment here. For Gill and his allies, non-discrimination is a new front of the movement, a campaign that pits LGBTQ advocates against the religious right. The election of Trump has only emboldened those looking to erase what they call the gains of the past decade, what we would call the erosion of the past decade. So Gill says Gill refuses to go on the defense, but says, quote, we're going into the hardest states in the country and we're going to punish the wicked. So it's located, his foundation is located in Denver. Security cameras mounted all over the outside. They say because it's common for them to get death threats. There's no evidence really behind the claim, but that's what the article says. After all, there's a genocide going on, right? And anyway, so one of the things here it says is on the wall in the conference room is an 18-point list of Gill's principles. Maxims like Colorado.
This is crazy.
Yeah, get this. Let me, if I make it a little larger.
Yeah, show that. You guys are going to freak out.
It doesn't work on this thing, but it's okay. I'll highlight it. There you go. Failure is good. The people who work for Gill tend to speak of him in reverential terms. As Courtney Cuff, the foundation's president and CEO, says, quote, going through that list of principles helps us at the foundation think through WWTGD. What would Tim Gill do?
The counterfeit of what would Jesus do, right? Exactly. Those bracelets that people used to wear. What would Jesus do?
Exactly. Folks, here's another example for you. Back in, as of 2007, there was exactly one pediatric gender clinic in America. It's 2007. Today, as this article, Daily Caller, shows, pediatric gender clinics have popped up all over the country in vast numbers over the past 15 years, offering psychological, medical, and even surgical interventions for children who feel uncomfortable. The explosion of these clinics coincided with the rapid rise of transgender identity among American youth. Right. Now, in 2007, there was exactly one pediatric gender clinic in America. Today, there are more than 300 pediatric gender clinics in the United States. Let me share this fact with you before we get to the 60 Minutes clip.
Yes.
And then an encouraging clip to take us out.
Isn't Tim the one that was the first to push this legislation through?
No, that was Martine Rothblatt.
Oh, that's right.
Who we're going to be telling you a lot more about Martine here.
Yeah.
All right, well, folks, there's enough material here.
Look at that bee on her shirt too.
Yeah, some of you know what that bee.
Him. I always see, this is the thing. We just called her a she.
Yeah.
It's a he.
Somebody's trying to be respectful. That's all.
No,
But you know what's happened?
It scrambles me.
It is. It's confusing. But what's happened recently? There have been many Christians who have been like, "Look, we just need to call them by their preferred pronouns. It can't hurt anything. It's hospitality, right? Christian hospitality." Thank the Lord. Recently, many of those people who said that a few years ago. People like Rosaria Butterfield, for example. She's a well-known former atheist lesbian who's now married to a Presbyterian pastor. And recently, she was one who did that. And she recently came out publicly and repented and said, don't do that. Don't do that because you are affirming something that is a lie. You're not helping. You're not doing anything good.
Exactly. And to be fair, that woman, Kelly J. Keene, that was on Calvin Robinson's video, she describes herself as a women's rights activist, actually. So she's just keen to the fact that it's super destructive what this trans movement is doing. And so because of that, they've targeted her. So another case in point of somebody who's she's a feminist, she's a secularist, but she's identified that this is a big con that's going on and it's destroying lives.
You know, one of the cons is the tough again here. The rate of self-harm, suicide, for trans-identified youth and trans adults, it's claimed that it's very high. Right? It's an epidemic. It's a big problem. Well, and you'll hear things like this again. The programming. It's better to have a live daughter than a dead son. Wow, compelling, right? Persuasive. That isn't, number one, it's an appeal to emotion. See,
well, that's a materialist worldview too. I mean, you know, because the eternal implications of that.
Yeah, and you'll find that all over this too, materialism. But what happens here now? This is what we described when the child is exposed to certain content that's inappropriate, and they're feel ashamed and they're traumatized. What's happening is they're the analytical part of the mind is being bypassed, right? And so that's what happens also with a comment, with a quote like that. It's better to have a live daughter than a dead son. That's an appeal to emotion. It's a non sequitur. And what that means is it doesn't follow, right? It doesn't actually follow that if I don't affirm my son in his transgender, that he's going to be dead. It doesn't follow. It's a non sequitur. But with the emotion, right? Anytime someone argues that way with you, they're trying to trick you. They're trying to manipulate you. There are no good long-term studies indicating that puberty blockers cure this kind of depression or prevent suicide, or there's not even any data to suggest that mental health is improved in any way from transitioning. Nor are there studies that show puberty blockers are even safe or even reversible when they're used off-label this way. Now, the thing I wanted to share with you was about a case that happened in the UK that you never heard about. We'll be getting into the Sam Vaknin's research on social media too. Who created it? What kind of people created it? And as such, when everyone uses social media, we start to think like the kind of people who created it. You can imagine what kind of people it was that created it, and why we see so many people who are using social media constantly are being pulled in this direction. So, Kira Bell, a young woman in the UK, was very troubled in her adolescence, and she was rushed to transition in her teen years. She later came to regret it. But what happened to her? Before she even knew before anyone really knew, she had undergone, puberty blockers, testosterone, top surgery, double mastectomy. Spent years on testosterone. Later realized that her problem really wasn't gender dysphoria to begin with. And so she sued the United Kingdom's National Gender Clinic, their major gender clinic. Now, how old do you think she was when she was rushed into this double mastectomy? Because clearly she needs to be a boy. And by removing breasts, that means you're a boy. By being infertile and taking testosterone, now you're a male, right? Well, she was 15 years old when that happened to her. Well, she sued, and in December of 2020, the High Court Justice examined her case and the claims of others, similarly situated plaintiffs, and Kira Bell won her case. In December 2020, the court examined the medical protocols that were applied to Kira Bell, the same protocols that are identical protocols to the ones that are used in the United States. The court was horrified that a young girl had been allowed to consent to begin a process of eliminating her future fertility and sexual function at the age of 15, when she could not possibly have gauged that loss. She couldn't have possibly been aware of what the consequences of what she was doing. Now, this was hailed as a landmark case in the Times of London, hailed as a landmark case by The Economist and The Guardian. Kira Bell's victory was widely viewed as a serious condemnation of the effort to fast-track teen girls to gender transition. One of the appalling things that the court noted was that the National Gender Clinic had been unable to show any psychological improvement in any of the adolescents that it had treated with transitioning hormones or surgery. And that's the argument, right? We're trying to save lives. Now, if you never heard about this, that's understandable, because American legacy media just pretended it didn't exist. And they still ignore it or dismiss stories like this about detransitioners, people who went through this and later regretted it. A lot of treatments, specifically that these girls have undergone, are permanent. Even though they'll do what they can to try to reverse some of the effects, infertility is not something that can be reversed. Double mastectomy is not something that can be reversed. And so it is that in the United States that this crisis among teenage girls gets treated as just a political issue, right? It's those basket of deplorables, right? It's the Trump people who don't want us to be heard, who don't want us to be treated as human. That's what they'll say. It's just a conservative issue here, right? And so perhaps the greatest medical scandal of our time, as Abigail Shrier calls it, is dismissed as a conservative preoccupation. Now, we would argue that it's way more than a medical scandal. It is a spiritual war. It is a battle that's going on.